Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Today we will be taking up another objection that has been raised against Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi's views. In this regard, we know that he has opined that as far as the first revelation of the Quran is concerned, the way it has been described in a narrative recorded by Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari and many other muhaddisun, it seems to be against the Quran, and also it seems to be against established practice. And he has raised 10 objections against this narrative. But before we summarize those objections, let us read the text of this narrative. Urwa reports from Aisha that she said, "The commencement of divine revelation to God's messenger was in the form of good dreams which came like daylight. Then the fondness for seclusion was endeared to him. He would stay in seclusion in the cave of Hira. There, for many days, he would do tahannus, which means worship. After that, he was returned to his family. He would take with him food and provisions for the stay, and then come back to his wife Khadija to take more food again. This continued till the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. Thereafter the angel came to him and said, 'Read.' He replied, 'I do not know how to read.' The Prophet added, 'The angel caught hold of me and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it any more. He then released me and again said to me, "Read." And I replied, "I do not know how to read." Thereupon he caught hold of me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it any more. He then released me and again said, "Read." So again I replied, "I do not know how to read." Thereupon he caught hold of me for the third time and pressed me and then released me and said, "اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم." Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most bountiful, who taught man by the pen, taught him what he knew not. After hearing this conversation, the messenger of God returned to his house trembling. He came over to Khadija bint Khuwaylid and said, "Have me covered, have me covered." So she had him covered. When his fear subsided, he conversed with Khadija and informed her with what happened and said, "I fear for my life." At this, Khadija replied, "Certainly not. I swear by God that he will never humiliate you. You fulfill the rights of your kindred, carry the burden of the weak, earn for the deprived, are hospitable to guests, and help people in calamities." Then Khadija took him to Waraka ibn Nawfal ibn Asad ibn Abdul Uzza, who was her paternal cousin. In the age of Jahiliyyah, Waraka had become a Christian. He knew how to write Hebrew. He could write from the Gospels whatever God willed he should write. At that time, he was very old and had gone blind. So Khadija said to him, "Listen to what your nephew has to say." At this, Waraka said, "O nephew, what is it that you saw?" So God's messenger informed him what he saw. At this, Waraka replied, "This is the same angel who would come to Moses. Would that I had been a strong young man. Would that I remained alive till that time when your nation will turn you out from your city." God's messenger then asked, "Will they turn me out?" Waraka replied, "Yes. Whenever a person has brought what you have brought, people have become his enemies. If I remain alive till that day, I shall fully help you." Then not much time elapsed before Waraka died, and divine revelation ceased to come to him. So now the first objection which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised against this narrative is that how Muhammad ﷺ was assigned as a messenger of God. Surely it can be regarded as one of the most important incidents of his life. Such is its significance that it should have been reported by the Prophet himself to his companions. A central personality in these narratives is the Prophet's wife Khadija. The same question arises about her. why did not she herself report this all-important event of the Prophet's life? A very similar question arises about other close companions of Prophet like Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali. May God be pleased with them. Such is the importance of this event that these companions should have narrated from the Prophet. On the other hand, we find a mursal narrative reporting this incident. So this narrative is not a muttasil one, it's a mursal narrative. So this is the first question which has been raised by Ustaz Ghamidi. The second important question that he has raised in this regard is that this narratives gives us the impression as if the Prophet was doing meditation or undergoing some spiritual exercise or muraqabah in which he was trying to establish contact with God, and as a result of that spiritual exercise and practice, ultimately he was able to. However, in the Quran, we don't find any such thing. In fact, the Quran actually says that as far as the Prophet is concerned, he never ever expected to establish any connection with God. He never expected that a book will be revealed to him. So, for example, in Surah 28, it is said, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَرْجُو أَن يُلْقَى إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ. You never expected that a book will be revealed to you. Similarly, in Surah Yunus, it is said, قُلْ لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا تَلَوْتُهُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَا أَضْرَاكُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ لَبِسْتُ فِيكُمْ عُمَرًا مِنْ قَبْلِهِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Say, had Allah willed, I would not have recited it to you, nor would He have made it known to you. I have lived my whole life among you before this revelation. Do you not understand? So in other words, as far as the Prophet is concerned, to him, this revelation, this contact by the divine is something that is always initiated by God Himself. It is not that the Prophet, in any case, in any situation, he has any inclination to contact the divine. Also, we see that this verse in which the Prophet has said that he has spent his whole life and he has not said anything like this before people, in which it would give this inclination that he is someone who is practicing these things and suddenly after practice is able to bring out such a masterpiece. In fact, he has presented this to be a proof of his prophethood, that suddenly if he has said something and he had never ever had said something similar to it, then this should automatically be a symbol and a sign for the people that it is entirely from God. It is nothing, and it is not an initiative at all from the Prophet himself. Now, the third question which Ustaz Ghamidi has said in this regard or raised in this regard is that the narrative says that Gabriel asked Prophet to read, and the words used in the narrative are Iqra, read. In the absence of any written thing being brought, this can only mean that he had asked the Prophet to repeat the words he was about to utter. Now, if this is so, then why did the Prophet reply that he cannot read? After all, he was capable of repeating words reciting to him. So this is a big anomaly, that if the Prophet, of course, was going to say anything, it could only have been that he could have repeated the words. And this is how we see the general way in which the person says read and you are required to sort of repeat it after him. So in the absence of any written thing being presented, why did he say that I'm not able to read? And this is of course a very, very significant question. The fourth question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised in this regard is that the narrative shows that the Prophet was struck with immense anxiety and great consternation when Gabriel came to him and did not know what was going on. He feared for his life and thought that something bad had happened to him. Khadija, his wife, had to assure him through various examples that God would never disgrace him. On the other hand, the Quran has described in detail that when prophethood is given to a person, he is absolutely sure about the event. He does not need any external corroboration from others. And secondly, he is never overcome with any fear, even though it happens suddenly and unexpectedly. And this can be seen from instances in which the Quran refers in detail to the incident when Moses, peace be upon him, was given or called to prophethood. A comparison between the two brings out stark differences and incongruities. The Quran clearly brings out the fact that prophethood was neither given to Moses on his desire nor any meditation or any spiritual exercise. It was purely God's choice. After tending to the herds of his father-in-law in Madian for many years, When Moses was going to Egypt with his family, he was suddenly made a prophet. In the chill of the dark night, when they had lost their way in the wilderness, he saw flames of fire far off and thought that he would go there to find the way and also bring back some embers for the family to protect them from the cold. It was then that God suddenly called him to prophethood and gave him the miracle of the staff. Also, when at that instant he expressed fear on seeing the staff turn into a snake, he was immediately assured by the Almighty that he had nothing to fear in God's presence. He did not need to go to his wife and family to seek assurance. So the Quran says, bear in mind when Moses said to his family, I have seen some fire. I will bring either some news from there or some embers of fire so that you can become warm. So when he came there, he heard a voice, blessed is he who is in this fire and around it, and exalted is God, Lord of the worlds. Moses, it is I, the powerful and wise God. Throw down your staff. So when he saw it moving as if it was a snake, he turned back and did not even look behind. God said, there is nothing to fear for messengers in my presence. So you can clearly see, viewers, that as far as this instance of revelation is concerned, the way it was given to Moses, it is clearly evident that Moses was given this assurance, there's nothing to fear, and as far as God Almighty is concerned, it is He who has chosen him for this task. The fifth question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised on this narrative is that most variants of this narrative mention that the first 5 verses of Surah Alaq were revealed at that instance. And these verses, of course, are اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So these are the 5 verses. But then the 6th verse begins with the words Kalla innal insana la yatgha. We know in the Arabic language the word kalla means certainly not. So if it is believed that the first 5 verses were revealed and then the rest of the surah was revealed, so it would have to be understood that the rest of the surah, when it was revealed for the second time, or the second installment was revealed, it would have begun with Kalla, Innal insana la yatgha. So Kalla is certainly not. And it is very highly unlikely that a new installment of revelation would begin with this word Kalla, because the word Kalla, certainly not, must have something before it which it has to negate by saying certainly not. So the point that is being made by him is that closely knit is this surah that one cannot in any way think and say that it has been revealed in 2 installments. Another point in this regard which Ustaz Ghamidi has made, and before him his own teacher Ustaz Amin Hassan Islahi has also made, is that the temper of this surah, the tone of this surah is such that it cannot be in any way regarded as the first revelation, because the words are very harsh, the words are very stern, and they can only be uttered in the time when the disbelievers had persisted in their denial and they deserved such a retribution. The surah has a very, very stern tone, and when this tone is thought to be the first instance of revelation, then this raises the question that how can this happen, that in the very first instance the Quraysh should be called to task. So I'm just going to read out a translation of this surah from which it will become evident that the rest of the surah has a very, very strong temper, a very, very harsh tone, and it is very unlikely that this could be the first revelation. So it goes, read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of congealed blood. Read, and your Lord is the most bounteous who taught by the pen. He taught man what he knew not. Certainly not. Indeed, man is being rebellious, considering himself to be self-sufficient. Indeed, to his Lord is the return. Just look at him who forbids a person when he prays. Just consider if this person is rightly guided or urges others to virtue. Just see if this person denied and turned away. Does he not know that Allah is observing? Certainly not. If he does not desist, we shall drag him by the forelock, a lying, sinful forelock. Then let him call his faction. We shall summon our gods. Certainly not. Obey him and bow down in prostration and draw near. So viewers, you can clearly see that the tone of this whole surah is such that it can in no way be regarded to be the first revelation. And the nature of this surah, the way it has addressed the Quraysh, it severely rebukes them. It reprimands them on this attitude. So we cannot think that this surah was the first surah. The sixth question in this regard, which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised, is that perhaps the most appropriate place for the Prophet to remain in seclusion and devotion was the house of God. If he had to go and meditate and indulge in some spiritual exercise, even if this was correct, then why did not he choose the Holy Kaaba? Why didn't he go there? Why did he choose to go to a far-off place, leaving aside the most accessible and plausible place for the purpose he had in mind? The seventh question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised in this regard is that Waraka ibn Nawfal, it seems from these narratives, never asked about the verses of the Quran, and the Prophet also never divulged him these verses. All the reply that he got, from which it can be gauged that he spoke about the angel who came. As far as the verses are concerned, they were never in contention. And it is very strange that the Prophet did not inform him that he was revealed these verses. The eighth question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised on this narrative is that why did Urwa not narrate from his mother? His mother was Asma, the elder sister of Aisha. So it was very plausible that he should have narrated from his own mother, but instead he actually narrated from his maternal aunt. And moreover, the only person to narrate from Aisha is he himself, Urwa. And the only person to narrate from Urwa is Ibn Shihab Zuhri. And in other words, we can say that one of the most important events of the Prophet's life was reported by only one person in the first three sections of the chain. So we have Aisha, we have Urwa, and then we have Zuhri. It thus also becomes a gharib narrative. The ninth question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised on this narrative is that it mentions a word yatahannas, which is a very rare word. We will not find it in any initial Arabic dictionary. In fact, it can be said with reasonable certainty that in the extant material, there is perhaps only one other narrative in which this word has been used. So, why is it that such a word has been used, which also needed an explanation that was furnished forthwith in the narrative by the word at-ta'abbud? So, the word tahannus will not be found in the earliest dictionaries. In fact, in later dictionaries in which this word is found, there are people who are trying to make sense of this word and they give various different explanations. The 10th question which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised on this narrative is that there are some variants which say that when there was a long interval in Wahi, such was the extent of the disturbance that the Prophet wanted to throw himself down from a mountain peak and commit suicide. Thus it is recorded in Bukhari, there came an interval in divine revelation for a while, and the Prophet became so sad in what has reached us that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. And every time he went up the mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are indeed God's messenger in truth." Whereupon his heart would become quiet and he would calm down and would return home. And whenever the period of the coming of the inspiration used to become long, he would again do what he has just done. He would climb to the mountain top and Gabriel would appear before him and say to him what he had said before. Viewers, we can clearly see that this is something that is of a very grave nature. First of all, it has been reported by the words Fima Balagana, and we know that this is what is technically called the Balaghat of Zuhri, which means that Zuhri, without disclosing his informants, he just reports a narrative without informing the source and then goes on to narrate it. In this particular area, we see that he has not disclosed his narrative, his sources once again. And secondly, we also see that what he has reported is very grave. He says that the Prophet was willing to commit suicide while going to the top of the mountain because the interval of the wahi had become long. Again, this is a very grave question, that how the Almighty can let this happen, how at all this could be something which is possible, especially when this particular part does not have a complete chain of narration. It is something which only Zuhri has recited. So viewers, these are the 10 questions which Ustaz Ghamidi has raised on this narrative. And now we will take a look at some of the other details.